the Lords of the Sith. Today we're going to discuss Rey and Kylo, also known as Reylo, aka the Sequel Trilogy's romance, and compare it to the prequel's romance, Anakin and Padme, aka Anidala. I'm Mary, and I'm here with Denise.
Hello, everybody.
And Lee.
Hello.
So guys, do you want to start off with your general impressions of the two?
Kylo and Anakin, they're all drama queens, and their romances reflect that, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that, I guess.
For me, I'm a pretty strong supporter of the idea of Reylo being reverse Anidala. For people who don't speak shipping, I mean, the idea that the romance between Kylo and Rey is the story of Anakin and Padme, but told in reverse, meaning we know Anakin, because of his love of Padme, he fell to the dark side. And in many ways, that is the dramatic heart of the prequel trilogy. Whereas Kylo Ren is going to be redeemed in part because of his love of Rey. And the connection between Rey and Kylo Ren is the dramatic core and actually is the story of the sequel trilogy. So I think it's fascinating that they've chosen to go that route. I know you don't fully agree, Denise, that there is a full parallel there, but I think it's so brilliant and well done. Where the Skywalker saga's tragedy began because of Anakin's love for Padme and how destructive it was to everyone. Whereas Reylo is going to help heal the damage that Anidala caused. So I think it all ties in beautifully in that way.
I like that as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you guys a little bit why I like it. I understand the idea that maybe Reylo is going to be Anidala different, with a different conclusion, a different basis, but I just don't buy that much that it should be that. I don't think it has that much symmetry, and that it should have that symmetry all the time, and that we should be looking for this symmetry all the time. And I also remember that I find that it's also a little bit of a reversed Obi-Kin, Obi-Wan and Anakin in certain ways, and so you have a symmetry that is more fluid than to say, no, this is exactly reverse Anidala. But I think it's just about semantics, right? We kind of agree mostly.
Oh, for sure. I think in general you can say the stories echo each other, and there are so many parallels that are apparent, but it's not like we're expecting that it's going to be an exact inverted replica of the arc. I mean, but in general, I think the themes are there. I always think about Reylo as being a corrected form of Anidala, because with Padme and Anakin, they were never really equals, I don't think. I think that there was always a weird kind of Anakin had very maternal projection towards his wife. You could see that in many ways Padme was giving him that maternal love that was taken away from him. So there's something a little bit not quite healthy there, and their relationship was never healthy because they were so deceitful and hiding from everyone. Part of their downfall was that although they were good people, they came together in the wrong way, and that poisoned the relationship from within. Whereas with Reylo, it's just the opposite. They start out very dysfunctional, but as they progress, they come to that healthy, balanced place that Anidala never could.
And you're right, actually, Lee. I'm just thinking of the Phantom Menace now, and there's a scene where Shia finds him on the ship, and she comforts him when he says he's cold and he misses his mother. So yeah, I can see that little element in their relationship.
And he's so young when they meet.
Yeah. I really like how when Anakin has turned to the dark side and he wants to take over the Empire with Padme, he quite forcefully says, oh, we can rule the galaxy together and make things the way we want to be. He's planning from the get-go to overthrow Palpatine and be Emperor and Empress with her. That's kind of, similar to what happens in The Last Jedi, except Kylo isn't planning it right from the get-go. He's not as selfish as Anakin, to put it mildly. He only thinks about taking over the galaxy with Rey after he kills Snoke. What I'm trying to say is Anakin, mostly him, and Padme, whereas Kylo, he kills Snoke for Rey because he wants to protect her. It's only after he kills him that he realizes, oh, maybe we should rule the galaxy and make a better place.
But I think with Anakin, he has this need for power, is his fear. He thinks that if he has power, he can prevent people from dying, It's more, what he needs is not really power. He wants emotional support, emotional stability, and he thinks he's going to achieve that with power. But Kylo is different. I don't think he's looking for power for that. I think for him, it's something new, this emotions he's feeling about about Rey.
This is one of those instances in which you can't really say that it's like a direct comparison, but I think the overarching themes are very much the same in both Reylo and Anidala. For me, the reason why Anakin fell to the dark side was because, as you say, Denise, he wanted to have the power to stop death so that he could protect Padme. He didn't want to lose her the way that he lost his mom. He felt powerless, and that's a big theme with Anakin because pretty much he's at the mercy of others when he's a kid and he's a slave, especially I think in that scene in the council where they were rejecting him outright in front of him. I mean, that was just terrible what they did to him, basically making him feel like he's not good enough, he's too old, and we're not going to train you. And he's waiting to see what's going to happen. His fate is kind of up in the air. I'm sure he must have felt so frustrated and small. So then he grows up and he's like, I need to be powerful so that I can be in charge. And the thing that he most wants to protect is Padme. He's not thinking of her as a person. He's thinking of her more as an object, as a maternal object, which is what I was getting at earlier. That's why it's so easy for Palpatine to tip Anakin over to the dark side, because he's so blinded by his need to protect Padme now that he's powerful, because he couldn't protect his mom when he was small and alone. Anakin can never get over that, how helpless he felt as a kid, I think. So to him, the power to rule the galaxy will help him protect his loved one. Whereas with Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, having power will help him protect himself so that if he is abandoned, he won't care because he's too powerful to care. And it all comes, I think we've talked about this in the Kylo psychology episode, from being abandoned by his family, being rejected by his family, and being so hurt by it. So he wants to become powerful so that he's never going to be vulnerable again. Rey doesn't play a part in Kylo's fall, but she will play a part in his coming back from the dark side. So it's a nice little parallel with Anakin about wanting power in order to protect, but as to why Anakin falls and why Kylo comes back, it's a direct contrast. So I think that's really nicely done.
Also, it's interesting, just a little bit off topic, it's also interesting how Kylo is also, he thinks he can protect himself by becoming Supreme Leader when he isn't, because Rey leaves him as a direct result of that. And he's crushed by it, so much so that he just launches a poorly planned attack on the Resistance base.
Mm-hmm. And it was really important for Rey to leave him, because if she had stayed, they would just be falling into the Anidala cycle. So this is where it's really key for that difference to be maintained so that they can do the reverse arc, But can we talk a little bit more about the start of the arc? For me, this is where the contrasts begin. And one of the things I really love about Reylo is that there's a little bit of inversion of the roles when you compare it to Anakin and Padme. Because in the two romances, you have a royal or someone, from high standing, highly regarded, and then you have somebody who's a nobody. When they first meet, you would never think that these two people can end up being romantically involved and having this epic romance together, right? So you think about when we first meet Anakin, he's a slave boy. And when you first meet Padme, she's actually like a queen. So it just never looks like they're going to be on the same page. They're never going to get to that point, but they do, and they have this lovely romance. And whereas with Kylo and Rey, he is essentially royalty. I mean, he's a Disney prince. And he is also, forgetting about that aspect of it, if you want to say, well, he's not really a prince because he rejected the title. We learned that in Bloodline. But he is the high command of the First Order, and he's an evil guy. So again, when I said evil, I made air quotes, by the way. Not somebody that you'd expect that would be interested in a good girl who's also a scavenger. She's way below his station socially. So there's that really nice kind of opposites attract element that you wouldn't expect them on paper to work out, but somehow it's just perfect. It's like that concept of the pot and the lid. They fit just right.
I'd like to argue a little bit. I totally agree with you, but I think, Anakin, I could say he's slightly higher up than Rey is because he was born of the Force and he becomes this legendary war hero. So he's basically, the Star Wars version of Jesus in a way, if you could make that comparison. So
no, but I'm talking about socially at the start of their arcs, right? He's a slave.
Oh,
he's
yeah.
a literal slave. Plus, we don't know who Rey is yet. She may very well end up being Anakin. I'm kidding, guys.
Well, she's coming to terms in becoming recognized as a respected hero, right? I think that's what the end of The Last Jedi meant. I know who you are, It's like she's not nobody anymore.
Right. At the start of her arc, she's just a scavenger, but now she's the hero of the Resistance.
Yeah. But there's one difference that I find that I missed in Anakin and Padme, but I actually think it's important, is that I don't don't never see them having this connection, right? I understand you, which it seems that it happens with Kylo and Rey in the interrogation. I feel it too, but I think it's actually important in a way that we don't have this I understand you, at least in the movies, because it means that he's projecting a lot. He's not really interacting with her as a fully complete person. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that he's a bad person. I'm just saying that there's so much projection there that it's
Anakin or
Anakin.
Okay, what do you mean when you say
He's
he doesn't
not.
say
I don't think there's a moment where he's with Padme and he understands her and she understands him.
Yeah.
There isn't, but I think it actually makes sense that he doesn't understand her. He just adores her and loves her, whatever the way she is, because she's not like sand.
He worships her, essentially. I think he puts her on a pedestal slightly. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Rey and Kylo, especially in The Last Jedi, kind of bond through their loneliness and of their being abandoned by their parental figures. Whereas Anakin, even though you could say he's like abandoned by the Jedi Council in a way, he feels misunderstood by everyone. Yet Padme never has that. She always has her family. She always has her friends. She always has her handmaidens. I don't think there's ever like a point in the movies or the books even where she feels abandoned. So yeah, you bang on the money, Denise.
Another nice parallel, I think, is how both relationships are, at least superficially, they would be quite controversial and scandalous if they were made public. Anakin being secretly married to Padme would have been a huge scandal, I think, politically and also, but especially among the Jedi Order, obviously. So they resort to deceit and hiding it. Whereas with Rey and Kylo, obviously it would be a huge shock to everyone on both sides of the argument. So there's that element of forbidden romance. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in the sequel trilogy when it comes out into the open that they've got this secret bond. Whereas with Anakin and Padme, everyone was able to keep it a secret pretty much. The public never really found out, never knew what happened there. So here it's going to blow up in everyone's face at some point in the sequel trilogy.
And it's going to be so very interesting.
Yes, it's the best kind of soap opera drama there is. But anyway, guys, what other parallels do we see between Anidala and Reylo?
Palpatine manipulates Padme and Anakin's relationship, essentially, so he can get Anakin to be his apprentice, whereas Rey starts to become close to Kylo and starts to loosen Snoke's hold on Kylo somewhat, and so Palpatine sort of like manipulates Anakin into he does kill Padme, let's be honest. And so he can have Anakin all to himself, essentially, whereas Snoke tries to get Kylo to kill Rey in order to have full control back over to Kylo. But the interesting thing is, where Palpatine succeeds, Snoke fails.
You said that Palpatine killed Padme. Do you mean that theory that he seeped her life force out to heal Anakin?
No.
How do you mean? Because she died of sadness.
No, through manipulation, right?
Yeah, because I didn't mean to say Palpatine killed Padme. No, just his manipulations caused Anakin
didn't
to
kill
kill
Padme.
I think he did.
No, come on. She gave up.
Yeah, but he was responsible in some way.
Why did she get sad? Come on, why did she get sad?
Because Anakin.
So it was Anakin's fault. Come on.
Yeah, that's another parallel. Actually, I don't know whether you could call it a visual parallel, but when they're both like beseeching Padme and Rey to join them, they're both just heartbroken at it, and the only difference is, Padme kind of loses her agency and gives up, whereas Rey kind of like remains strong and says, "I'm not dealing with this mess. Come and find me when you're done. You can sleep on the couch for now."
There is a similar rejection by both women of what's being proposed to them, right? The difference is that Padme later crumbles, but there is a rejection. Like, it's so funny because a lot of Star Wars fans make fun of George Lucas's horrible dialogues and in the PT. But I really love the way that Padme turned down Anakin's offer, where she said, "You're breaking my heart and you're going down a path I cannot follow." I mean, that's pretty clear. Whereas Rey says, "Oh, don't go this way, Ben." But she's basically saying the same thing to him. There's no way that I can follow you. In many ways, she's telling him she wants to be with him, but not like this. Just like Padme rejected Anakin.
Yeah, also there is a little difference because Anakin and Padme have been in an established relationship for like 3 years at that point, whereas Rey and Kylo are only just like in the beginning of their relationship, so to speak. So it's kind of interesting how their relationships cause them to like even though it's the same in context, the way they handle it speaks volumes about how experienced and inexperienced they are, basically, about where the stages of their relationship are.
Yeah, and again, if you look at the bigger picture, it's because one couple is at the end of their romance and another one's just at the very start. So it's super promising for Reylo. Things could have gone terribly wrong if she had stayed with him in that moment. And maybe even if Kylo had left with Rey in that moment to help the resistance, because he wasn't there emotionally or mentally. So I think it would have just ended in disaster. But now with this separation of the lovers and the realization that they need to be together, it's just really good.
It's funny because with Padme and Anakin, the end of the second arc was their wedding, right? And it was actually a crisis for them. And I remember you saying that when Padme, she marries Anakin, she takes his robot hand,
Mm-hmm.
But
I found that so romantic.
But think about it, because with Darth Vader we have established that this half machine is kind of like evil, right? So the moment she takes his hand, that's mechanic, it's almost as if she's touching evil. She's accepting that there is something beautiful, she's accepting it, but there is also that she's becoming corrupted. And it's whereas with Kylo, you have that moment where he takes his shirtless, so first you see that he's not he's completely human, he's not machine. And she also, when they take their hands for the first time, it's real hands, human hands, right? Like human
that's
contact.
Beautiful, Denise.
So yeah,
that's a really nice, symbolically, obviously, when Padme takes hold of the mechanical artificial hand, that's the beginning of Darth Vader. Later on, even Palpatine tells Anakin that he was right to cut off the head of Dooku, because you cut your hand, you wanted revenge, it's only natural. So that's, in many ways, symbolically, that's the beginning of the end for him as Anakin and the start of Darth Vader. And Padme doesn't know how to deal with that whole I killed the sand people thing, so she just hugs him and accepts him, where she really should have given him pushback to help him, right? But she didn't know how to do that. So that's their mess, from there it just devolves. Whereas with Rey, she totally has rejected consistently Kylo Ren, the machine part of him, like the way that he tries to fake himself into Darth Vader. She wants nothing to do with that, but when she sees the gorgeous man that's a human, that's what she wants. And that's that touching of the hands is a really nice kind of inversion of the Anakin Padme thing. That's great. I hadn't even thought of that before.
No. That's amazing, Denise, and I'll just add that scene in the throne room where he offers his gloved hand to her. That's her rejecting Kylo Ren. That's, her rejecting the evilness, of course, and
exactly.
She wants the blood and flesh hand belonging to Ben Solo. So
should have taken the glove off.
Yeah. But it's symbolic.
But with Padme taking the flesh hand, if you say that's the beginning of Darth Vader and darkness, then maybe Rey rejecting Kylo Ren's hand is the end of his darkness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the door shutting that everybody was so scandalized by. Oh, she shut the door on him. It's the end. No, it's the beginning. It's the symbolic ending of Kylo Ren is starting there. And by the way, that's a very simplistic way of putting it. We're talking about symbolism. Obviously, Kylo Ren is never going to be fully gone. Just like Darth Vader could never fully get rid of Anakin in the end.
Yeah, they are the same.
The other parallel I wanted to talk about is that we've always mentioned the shot where we have one shot of Anakin, legs spread apart, hands behind him staring at a lake, and then we have a shot of Kylo, legs slightly spread apart, hands in front of him staring at a war thing. And I think it's actually meaningful, and I really love these parallels that Rian Johnson did. It's really neat because you see Anakin is staring at water, and water, we're talking about feelings, and it's right before he starts to bond with Padme. It's right before it. He's also right before he starts bonding a little bit better with Rey, but he has the war in front of him, but there's a glass separating him from there. It's almost as if he has to choose there. In front of him is the war machine, and he turns around to face Rey, and I think that's super beautiful. But also for Anakin, it's different because he's almost kind of like with his feeling is something different. So I think it's a parallel that works as well, parallel and contrast.
That's really interesting, Denise. And I just want to say there's also kind of like an interesting parallel in Revenge of the Sith. It's just before Anakin decides to go after Mace Windu and stop him from killing Palpatine. There's that scene where Anakin and Padme are separated across Coruscant. And I think even in the novelization, they have like a little communication across the Force. Force because their bonds are so strong. But anyway, he could have just stayed there and let Mace Windu kill Palpatine, and then Padme would have been fine. But he instead chose to take darkness, and so he turned away from Padme and turned around and went to Palpatine. So he went to the dark, and Kylo was turning around to the light, in some other words.
To go back to what you were saying earlier about Snoke, Mary, Kylo killed Snoke in part because of Rey. There's a really nice moment where the camera zooms in on his face as Rey is being tortured by Snoke, and you can see his face just hardening, and it's like, that's not going to end well for Snoke. They have a complicated relationship, but Rey was the catalyst for Kylo freeing himself from Snoke. Whereas with Anakin, he had the option of killing Palpatine in that moment to protect his master. But instead, he decides to protect Palpatine. And it's because Palpatine had dangled the possibility of, I can help you save your wife when they were at the opera earlier. Again, a really nice kind of contrast, but still parallel.
There's also the parallel with her in the coffin. We have when Padme dies, she's in the coffin, and when Rey goes to Kylo, she's in that coffin thing as well. But it's different because Rey, she looks like a knight because she has that lightsaber that she's holding, and it's the beginning when they are getting together. Whereas with Padme is obviously the end, right? Because she's going somewhere he can't follow right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say Rey. You could even say like Rey is kind of like Snow White in that situation. She's being reborn. She's gone into the coffin like a young girl, and she emerges as a woman essentially. But with Padme, it's just unfortunately, it's just death. She's never going to wake up. She's never going to be a mum to her children.
And again, there's a really nice almost continuum between Rey and Padme as expression of womanhood. So with Rey, she's just entering into womanhood. With Padme, she's already had her babies and now she's dead. So it's like a really nice complete arc there as well. Now, there are some non-visual parallels, which we've talked a little bit about before that I thought was still good to mention. Some resonance, kind of echoes of the other trilogies, and I really love those moments that are like references of the other trilogies. Like, for example, this is kind of lame and reaching, but I love it. When you see Anakin and Padme talking about a droid and kind of gushing about C-3PO and how great he is. Do you remember that in The Phantom Menace? Anakin shows Padme that he's building C-3PO, and he's like, isn't he perfect? And she's like, he's amazing. I love that. That's one of my favorite things about the trilogies. And then you have a moment where Kylo and Rey are talking about a droid too, which is BB-8. Although they're not really gushing about him, but it's still nice to see them kind of geeking out about droids. And then there's other more meaningful parallels. Like, for example, we've talked about the whole compassion thing. Padme and Anakin talk about how Jedi are, in Anakin's view, encouraged to love because they're encouraged to be compassionate, and he defines compassion as a form of love. Whereas then we hear Snoke, well, not really, that didn't actually make it onto the movie, but it did make it onto the novelization, where Snoke is mocking Kylo for having compassion for Rey, and he denies it. And he's like, no, I would never. But yeah, he does have compassion.
I think they cut it because it was giving too much away.
Absolutely. And I know that when we were discussing this before in our masculinity of Star Wars, I don't know if you remember this, Denise, but we were talking about Kylo having compassion for Rey, and I remember in the comments, you guys are nuts. Kylo doesn't have compassion for Rey. He hates her. She cut his face. There's no way that he could have good feelings about her. And it's like, okay, you need to watch it again because you totally missed it. If they had left that in there, it would be super obvious to people who maybe didn't notice it the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it should have been left in there because we wouldn't have had 2 whole years of people insisting they were cousins or siblings or whatever. Because
they overdid it.
Yeah, but there's some people who still believe it, right?
I know. Just why? They've outright confirmed it now that she's not a Skywalker, guys. Come on. But there's one parallel that I, just going back to what you said before, Lee, about the parallels between them talking about droids. But it's just a little thing, really, that I just like. But both Anakin and Kylo are kind of like showing off in their own way. Anakin's talking about how he's built C-3PO, and Kylo's kind of talking not really about the droid, but about saying, oh, we have the rest of the map. We recovered it from the archive. So they're both, I like it that they're kind of trying to impress impress this girl that they like in their own way.
Yeah, they're nerds.
They're nerds. Cute nerds.
Well, another kind of non-visual parallel that we talked about before, and this one actually runs through all three of the trilogies with the romances, is that whole thing about people kind of bragging about the fact that they're never going to fall for this person. We saw Padme do this when she tells Anakin, I'm never going to give in to this. And then like 5 minutes later, she's totally giving in to this. And then the same thing with Han and Leia, where she says that, I'd rather kiss a Wookiee. And then she's making out with him a few minutes later. And the same thing with Kylo Ren when he says to Snoke, like, by the grace of your training, I will not be seduced. Of course he's seduced by Rey a few minutes later. So it's really nice. I really like that.
There's also the same thing in the interrogations, like, what did this say? I'm not giving you anything. I'm pretty sure she's giving you she's gonna give him something. So yeah.
5 minutes later, she's telling him that he's not alone either, and holding out her hand to him. So she gave him her hand. Of course she gave him something.
She's gonna give him more, okay?
What do you guys think about, do you think Reylo will be doomed like Anidala, or will it not be? I already know my answer.
That's where I know that we differ in our opinions. For me, in order to have a true reversal of the Anidala tragedy, which is what Reylo is working up to, it has to work at the end. They can't be doomed. They can't just go out of their way to show us that they're avoiding all the Anidala pitfalls only to have them end in the same way with a tragic death of the lovers. Aside from the fact that it's a fairy tale, I think if they had stayed together, it would be doomed. And that's important to know, that when you stay together in the second act, it's trouble. It means that it's going to end in tragedy. Everyone has to separate in order to grow as individual people, miss each other, pine for each other, and then come together again at the climax of the story. That happens time and time again in literature.
Mm-hmm. Their relationship, even if it hasn't been fully blown romantic now, I mean, Kylo and Rey, it brings in a way the best of both of them, because it made Rey get up and say, no, I'm gonna stop depending on Luke. So in a way it was good. It made Kylo finally take the attitude that he needed to take, whereas with Anakin and Padme, it brought out the worst in both of them, and it's going in different directions, right? So it's these little signs, these little opposite things that we see that they're different. Like, even if the throne room, I forgot to say, when he reaches out his hand for her, it's a little bit like when Anakin did for her after, but he was first choking her, right? Which is not good. And Kylo was just reaching for his lightsaber. So everything is going in different directions, yeah.
I hope it's not tragic like Anidala. I mean, because like you said, Lee, I agree, it's a fairy tale.
From a storytelling narrative and thematic standpoint, there is no other alternative. I mean, there can't be a tragic ending with the lovers dying. It's not Romeo and Juliet, it's Star Wars. That theme worked with Anakin and Padme because they were kicking off the saga. I mean, you had to explain how Luke and Leia ended up separated at birth and how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. So you had to throw in tons of tragedy and sadness. But is that really how they're going to conclude the Skywalker story? The way they're saying it now is like, this is the end of the end. I don't believe that. I think there's going to be more, maybe like 5-10 years, but the way that they're marketing it, this is it. So they can't do something tragic and sad that leaves everybody crying and despondently, and I just don't see it happening.
But something I was going to say, this story that it's the end of the Skywalker saga, those bands that have 5 last tours? It's their last tour, and then 1 year later, it's their last tour again. Yeah, but I think the saga will continue. So either they finish together or they have kids. But the relationship is positive. It's something positive for both of them. That's what really matters, I think.
Yeah.
Rey and Kylo.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like you said it earlier, Denise. If Kylo dies, if Kylo is unredeemed, if there's a terrible tragic ending with him, it's almost like saying that the sacrifice of Han, the sacrifice of Luke, it's gonna be all for nothing. All for nothing. No, that's not Star Wars, and that's not a kids movie, and that's not a fairy tale. So I just don't see it as a likelihood that there's going to be anything tragic.
There's also the fact that, it could be, if he dies unredeemed, what kind of message does that say to children? It says that you can never have a second chance.
Well, but he will be redeemed, right?
What do you think of the idea that Reylo is possibly reincarnated Amidala?
I think that's a terrible idea. What are they saying? Like, who is who? Rey is Anakin and Padme is Kylo? So Kylo's gonna have a romance with Anakin? I'm sorry. I know I support crazy ships. I'm totally into people shipping what they want, but this is too much even for me.
No, I think Rey's Padme and Kylo is interested in his grandma.
No, that can't be.
No, but I understand a little bit. It's a little bit like the parentage series. You take these parallels, and it is in a way this story being retold and being corrected, and I think people interpret it as in a way that these characters are gonna have a second chance to make it right, but it's not really like that, right? It's just like Kylo is gonna have a second chance to redeem his family and make his relationship right. And other than that, I don't see reincarnation in the Star Wars lore, and I don't see how they would introduce that. I think it's a little bit just like the wish that some people thought, oh no, Rey is Anakin reincarnated, or now Rey is Padme and Kylo is Anakin. I understand the feeling behind it, but I don't think they would do it, and I don't think it makes sense.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, it would be pretty lazy, I think, from a storytelling standpoint, to do something like that. You know?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, as like an actual reincarnation thing, like Padme being Rey or Anakin, or Kylo being Rey or Anakin, I think it's terrible. I just think it's weird, for a lack of a better word, because it just, for me, reincarnation is them being reborn as themselves. Like, it's not, and Kylo is not Anakin. There's some similarities, but he's not Anakin, just as Rey isn't Padme. Mm-hmm. So when I think of, like, reincarnated Anidala, I think of, more of what we've just been talking about, that there are parallels.
So I guess what we're all agreeing on is that thematically and in terms of directions of the story, there is a reincarnation of themes.
Yes.
And the arc is reincarnated in a healthier way. It's almost like you think of the trilogies being the Wheel of Samsara. You have this messed up past, and then you get to come back each time until you eventually, achieve a higher level of existence, right? So Reylo is the evolved Anidala in many ways, but it's not a literal reincarnation.
Exactly, you put it beautifully. It's like the Force finding balance again. Anakin and Padme's relationship was supposed to bring the balance to it, but instead it knocked it off course, and Reylo will be the one to bring it back.
Actually, that ties into what I wanted to talk about next, which was, Denise, you had brought up the idea of how Rey and Kylo Ren differ from Anakin and Padme, and how their romance is playing out in large part because they stay true to their convictions. At least they have up until now. Whereas Padme and Anakin both betrayed their convictions, and that led to their downfall.
She believes in the resistance, and she believes in doing what's right. She doesn't... and we talk about how important it is for her to refuse him, but it's important for him. At that moment, he hadn't changed his mind. If he had followed her blindly, it would have been bad as well. He was still thinking that the First Order was kind of good, and that the fact that he stayed there, he was true to what he believed in, even if it was wrong, right? So it's kind of good. I don't know.
I love the fact that he says, let's let it all die. The Jedi, the Sith, Snoke, Skywalker, the Rebels. He doesn't say the First Order. I'm just like, So yeah, really, dude? You don't want the First Order to die? You still want to, have the same
because
thing?
Because he wants power.
And I know.
Wants power. He doesn't want to be weak and foolish like his father. He wants the whole army backing him up. That makes sense to me. But it tells you that he's not quite there yet.
Exactly.
This is a really nice line to draw where we say, okay, it's good that they're both sticking to their convictions, but at the same time, they're both wrong. In their own way, they're wrong. They have good intentions, but they're wrong. Rey is looking at everything black and white. She demands perfection. If you're going to be with her, you have to be the good Ben. You can't have any of this Kylo Ren stuff in you. She still has this childish way of thinking all or nothing. Whereas with Kylo Ren, he's thinking that who cares about everyone else? Let's just you and I do our own thing and let the past die and all this stuff. I mean, let the past die. It's such an edgy little catchphrase, but it's a fallacy. I talked about this before. It's a false lesson of The Last Jedi because he can't let the past die. He can't deny the truth that is his family. The more he tries to run away from it, the more he's running away from who he really is, Ben Solo. So they both have to mature in their beliefs, and then eventually those beliefs, I think, are going to intersect and they'll be able to come together. But it's really important that they don't betray their ideals and their beliefs and their moral system just to be together like Anakin and Padme did. I talked about this before in the Women in Star Wars episode. Like, I feel like Padme betrayed herself tremendously. The Padme that we meet in The Phantom Menace is a completely different person from the one who ends up with Anakin. It was like a betrayal of both of their selves, so couldn't work out.
That's just made me think of a certain scene in Attack of the Clones where they're having their little picnic in the meadow, and Anakin is talking about, how politics are flawed and that they should be mated to all, agree and stand in line. And Padme goes, no, that's a dictatorship. And she still, doesn't really challenge him, on that. She just sort of goes with it and gets distracted by him smirking at her, basically. Whereas Rey, just completely doesn't let Ben Solo's puppy eyes move her. Even though she is moved by it, but she doesn't let him, change her beliefs, which is good.
Yeah. With Padme, I think she's in denial. In many ways, Rey is in denial too, but it's different. With Padme, Anakin showed her who he was. He never lied to her about anything. He didn't hide the fact that he killed the Sand People. He didn't lie to her about the fact that he would like to be a dictator and have peace enforced upon the galaxy. But she chose to overlook that and be like, there's no way, no way he would think that or really do that. She just pretended like it didn't exist. There's a moment where she tells him in Attack of the Clones, there's no way that we can be together and living a lie. I couldn't do that, could you? And he's like, no, but obviously he can. And that's exactly what she ends up doing. So in a way, I talked about this before, I do believe that Padme's love of Anakin corrupted her, and that's why it just couldn't work out.
Hopefully Rey's love for Ben will uncorrupt him, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, and it's not corrupting to her, and that was something that was really nice in The Last Jedi, how it's positive, right? Her discovery of those feelings and everything.
Yeah.
Like we were saying, with Padme and Anakin, in order for them to be together, they had to betray themselves and get corrupted in each other. Whereas Rey and Kylo Ren's coming together means that they're actually evolving and becoming better people. Rey isn't in denial about Kylo. She's in denial about herself, really, and about this idea that, I don't want to be bad. I don't want to have this thing in me. I want to be perfect, Rey, so that I don't get rejected by my parents again. So she's got this whole thing to work out. And accepting and loving Kylo Ren will be a way of also accepting and loving herself and being comfortable with not being perfect. So it's really nice. It's set up so well. I think that they've done that masterfully. So many other things I haven't really liked how they've played out, but this is so good. And it ties in so perfectly with the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I hope that people who hate, the sequel trilogy can come to terms with that it's just a great tribute to the themes that are at the core of Star Wars are all played out beautifully in Reylo.
Oh, I agree. So, I think I have one last question for you guys before we finish. Which relationship do you prefer more, Anidala or Reylo?
Obviously Reylo. I think Reylo is definitely going to be more satisfying in the end.
Yeah, Reylo is more interesting. The problem with Padme and Anakin was that they never had this moment, I understand you, which I don't think it's a problem with the script. I think it actually plays perfectly in what their arc is going to be like, but it doesn't convince as a couple that you say, yeah, these people really do love each other, right? If it was another person, not Padme, someone else with a completely different personality, maybe he would love just the same, because it's a little there's some of an obsessive nature there.
Exactly.
But it's beautifully done as something tragic.
You really hit the nail on the head, Denise. If you had put in any other girl that young Anakin had been in contact with when he was separated from his mom, he would have imprinted on her. It's not really about Padme and what makes her a unique person. It's just that she was there and he loves the idea of her and the fact that he gets to have a mom after all. So any older woman would have been fine. But with Reylo, you need each of their qualities. You need them to be who they are in order for this to work. So it feels more meaningful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree. For me, I prefer Reylo. Obviously, I'm just not as much of an Anidala fan as I used to be as a kid, because I love Reylo because they are each other's equals, and that Kylo finds her so fascinating and, is not scared of her power and her gender, while Rey recognizes that actually she does have something in common with this monster who she originally perceived to be, and yet she realizes that he's not all a monster, and she does have something in common with him, especially his loneliness, and kind of like, it wakes her up essentially that, everything's not as black and white, even though she still retains her black and white thinking, and I hope that plays into episode 9 a lot more.
Something else, we're talking about how Padme is a little he's blind to her because Anakin is blind to Padme because she's basically, especially in episode 3, she's fighting against him, basically, against what he's doing. They're in opposite ends of the political spectrum, but neither of them is paying attention to what the other is doing, right? Or really takes the other person seriously, which is quite interesting.
I kind of like maybe say Rey could be the same, except she goes to Ben and just says, I'll be able to redeem Ben Solo and he can come back and help the Resistance, and she gets a very nasty wake-up call. But it remains to be seen how she'll handle it in episode 9, and that's a good thing because we'll be able to see that as well. The story continues, unfortunately, as it didn't with Anakin and Padme. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did recording it. If you like our content, then please click subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, SoundCloud. May the Force serve you well.